It started with a tunnel, one no one was supposed to find. Hidden beneath the home of Tyler Robinson, the man accused in the Charlie Kirk case, federal agents uncovered something that instantly changed the direction of the entire investigation: a narrow underground passage carved beneath layers of concrete leading to a sealed chamber. And now, weeks later, Tyler Robinson has finally spoken. In his confession, he said the tunnel wasn't his doing. He claimed it was built by someone else, someone he once trusted. A name that investigators have now connected to a growing web of political extremism and secrecy. His name was Lance Twiggs. And according to Tyler, the two weren't acting alone. What he revealed next has left even the FBI speechless, a hidden network masked by ideology, operating beneath the surface of a case the nation thought it understood. Was this the act of one unstable man or something far more coordinated? Was the tunnel just a hiding place or the center of a plot no one saw coming? Before we go deeper into Tyler Robinson's shocking confession and the group now under federal scrutiny, take a second to support this investigation. Like this video, share it with someone following the case, and subscribe so you never miss an update. And let us know in the comments, where are you watching from and what do you think this confession really means? Because tonight we're breaking down every detail and what the FBI found when the truth began to surface.
Little face.
To understand the gravity of Tyler Robinson's confession, we have to go back to the moment that changed everything. It was just past 12 p.m. on a bright, calm afternoon when Charlie Kirk stepped out of a small community event in downtown Phoenix. The gathering had been informal, focused on civic engagement and youth leadership, the kind of outreach work Kirk had been doing for years. Eyewitnesses recall laughter, casual conversations, a few supporters taking photos. Then, in an instant, it turned to chaos. A single gunshot shattered the midday calm. People screamed, scrambled for cover. Within seconds, security rushed forward and police sirens echoed across the block. Charlie Kirk was found on the ground, unresponsive, with a gunshot wound to his upper torso. Paramedics arrived almost immediately, working frantically to stabilize him before transporting him to a nearby medical center. But despite their efforts, he was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. For a nation already on edge, it was a moment of disbelief. News alerts flashed across screens, social media flooded with confusion and grief. For many, it didn't feel real, not just because of who the victim was, but because of what he represented. To his supporters, Charlie Kirk was a voice, polarizing to some, but undeniably influential. To his critics, he was controversial, but to his family, friends, and community, he was a person, a son, a husband, a mentor, taken in broad daylight. And as tributes poured in, law enforcement quickly mobilized. A manhunt began within the hour, and before nightfall, Tyler Robinson, a 27-year-old local contractor with no prior criminal record, was taken into custody. At first, it seemed straightforward, a politically motivated act driven by ideology. But over the days that followed, investigators began noticing details that didn't quite add up. The weapon's ballistic signature didn't match initial reports. Surveillance footage appeared edited, and Tyler's behavior, calm, detached, almost rehearsed, puzzled even seasoned detectives. Still, the public accepted what they were told, that one man had acted alone. Until weeks later, a search of his home revealed something that changed everything: a hidden tunnel concealed beneath layers of reinforced flooring. And that discovery would unravel the simple story authorities once believed. In the early hours following Charlie Kirk's death, law enforcement officials moved swiftly to establish a clear sequence of events. According to the official narrative, Tyler Robinson acted alone. Investigators claimed he had planned the shooting meticulously, motivated by political extremism and personal resentment toward Kirk's influence. Press conferences were held, statements delivered with conviction. The police chief at the time called it an open and shut case. Prosecutors emphasized that Robinson had confessed early inconsistencies, that digital evidence tied him to online forums filled with anti-conservative rhetoric, and that he had allegedly been spotted scouting the area days before the incident. The story spread fast. A troubled young man radicalized online, taking violent action against a public figure he disagreed with. For the general public, it was easy to digest: one gunman, one motive, one tragedy. It fit neatly into the polarized narratives that already divided the country. Within 48 hours, major outlets were echoing the same storyline: lone wolf shooter arrested in Charlie Kirk murder. No mention of accomplices, no talk of coordination, just a solitary figure, Tyler Robinson, painted as both monster and mystery. But behind the cameras, not everyone was convinced. Forensic specialists raised quiet questions about the bullet trajectory and impact location, which didn't align perfectly with the rooftop vantage point investigators claimed Robinson had used. Some analysts noted how the supposed rifle seen on scene was never photographed in Robinson's possession. Still, those doubts were buried beneath the speed of the breaking story. The justice system moved forward, the public mourned, and life for most seemed to move on. But now, barely a month later, everything has changed. Because in his recent confession, Tyler Robinson told investigators something that reframes the entire case. He admitted that the basement tunnel beneath his home, the one discovered during a secondary FBI search, wasn't built by him at all. He claimed it was constructed by a man named Lance Twiggs, a figure previously dismissed as irrelevant to the case. And more disturbingly, Robinson alleged that the project was influenced and financed by a secret ANTIFA-linked network, one that operated under a facade of community activism but harbored far more dangerous intentions. A secret tunnel, a hidden influence, and a connection to an underground group that might have been manipulating events from the very beginning. The official story was no longer holding together. The moment Tyler Robinson's confession surfaced, the lone actor narrative began to fracture piece by piece. For weeks, investigators had maintained that the murder weapon, a high-powered rifle, had been fired from an elevated position on campus. But when FBI forensic teams revisited the ballistic evidence, discrepancies jumped out immediately. The bullet trajectory didn't align with the rooftop angle authorities initially claimed. Instead, it matched a ground-level shot, a trajectory that now suggested the shooter was positioned much closer to Charlie Kirk when the fatal round was fired. Even more alarming was what investigators uncovered during the second search of Robinson's home, the tunnel entrance hidden behind a false wall in the basement. The passage descended nearly 12 feet underground and extended almost 50 feet toward a drainage system that connected to a nearby park. Within that tunnel, agents discovered a small storage alcove with metal racks, scattered ammunition boxes, and faint traces of gunpowder residue. But what made the FBI team go pale wasn't the weapons cache. It was the symbols painted crudely on the wall, markings consistent with those associated with extremist subgroups that had been linked to political violence in the past. Still, the timeline wasn't adding up. If Tyler Robinson had built and used the tunnel himself, why wasn't there any trace of recent construction on his financial records or equipment purchases? Experts began digging literally and metaphorically through the data. Credit statements, online orders, and hardware store receipts all failed to show anything tying Robinson to the construction. But one digital breadcrumb stood out: a series of encrypted text messages exchanged with someone named Twiggs, referencing basement progress, reinforced entry, and the drop zone. Those same messages were time-stamped weeks before the shooting, and forensic analysts have now verified that they originated from an encrypted network known for use by underground activist circles. And then came the most chilling detail. Satellite scans revealed heat signatures from beneath the property 2 nights before the shooting, suggesting that someone had been inside the tunnel shortly before the attack. Was it Tyler Robinson, or was it Lance Twiggs? And if it was Twiggs, why was his presence concealed from the official report? The more investigators looked, the more the truth unraveled. Chain of custody errors surfaced in the initial crime scene documentation. Autopsy records showed a delayed time of death notation that didn't match eyewitness recollections. And most damning of all, surveillance footage from a nearby parking lot, which had been marked as irrelevant in the early stages of the investigation, was now being re-examined frame by frame. Because on that footage, a figure could be seen entering the wooded area adjacent to the drainage field just 30 minutes before the shooting, the same area the tunnel was later found to connect to. The cracks were no longer small. They were fractures, exposing what could be one of the most elaborate cover-ups in recent memory. When news of Tyler Robinson's confession broke, the first to react weren't the investigators, it was the witnesses who had been there that afternoon. Several attendees at the Utah Valley University event came forward, their testimonies suddenly taking on a new light. One woman, seated just 20 yards from the stage, described seeing a shadow moving near the west wing, nowhere near the rooftop where authorities claimed Robinson had been stationed. Another attendee, a university staff member, recalled a faint metallic clang beneath the ground seconds before the gunshot echoed. At the time, these details seemed like background noise in the chaos, but after the FBI confirmed the tunnel's existence and Robinson admitted knowledge of it, those forgotten accounts became crucial. Even more startling were statements from construction workers who had been contracted to remodel the lower level of Robinson's house weeks before the murder. According to one worker, they were dismissed suddenly and paid in cash by someone they later identified as Lance Twiggs, Robinson's boyfriend. One of them described hearing drilling sounds at odd hours as if they were hollowing out something underneath. Another claimed they saw what looked like ventilation tubing being lowered into the ground, equipment that didn't match any normal basement renovation. Then came the leak. An anonymous insider from within the FBI, whose authenticity is still being debated, released excerpts from interrogation notes. In them, Tyler Robinson admitted that he did not design or build the tunnel. Instead, he said it was Lance's idea, part of a safe space project organized by what he referred to as a support network, later understood to be a clandestine ANTIFA-linked subgroup with strong ties to radical transgender activism. According to Robinson, the group met secretly in encrypted chat rooms discussing resistance methods, anti-corporate operations, and symbolic demonstrations. What's chilling is that the graffiti and coded markings found inside the tunnel matched phrases lifted directly from those online exchanges. But Robinson's tone during his confession was conflicted. He didn't sound like a mastermind, more like someone manipulated, emotionally cornered, and indoctrinated. He described Lance Twiggs as the architect, someone who convinced him that Charlie Kirk represented the machine they had to stop. One investigator reportedly summarized it bluntly: he didn't confess like a killer, he confessed like a follower. Meanwhile, neighbors who had dismissed early rumors about the mansion's strange nighttime activity began speaking publicly. Several reported seeing unmarked vans parked in front of the house days before the shooting, and again on the night after the incident when the property was supposedly sealed off. And then there was the footage, the same grainy recording from the tunnel's security system. A partial frame showed two silhouettes, one matching Robinson's build, the other slimmer, shorter, with long hair consistent with Lance Twiggs. Investigators haven't released that footage in full, citing ongoing analysis, but insiders say it leaves little doubt Tyler Robinson wasn't alone. The so-called hidden tunnel confession wasn't just an admission of guilt. It was a map leading directly into a web of influence, ideology, and manipulation far darker than anyone expected. The day Tyler Robinson finally broke his silence, the room was silent enough to hear the air conditioner hum. After weeks of denial, short answers, and emotional breakdowns, something inside him shifted. According to the FBI transcript, it happened after agents showed him a series of photographs, images taken from inside the tunnel beneath his own home. He stared at them for nearly a full minute before whispering, "I didn't build it, Lance did." Those 4 words changed the entire trajectory of the case. Robinson confessed that the tunnel began as what he was told was a private retreat, a hidden project conceived by his boyfriend Lance Twiggs and a small group of associates tied to an online organization known for its radical, anti-establishment leanings, a group that investigators now describe as an Antifa-affiliated trans activist network. In his statement, Robinson claimed he had no idea what the tunnel would eventually be used for. At first, he said Lance called it an underground studio, a place where they could record content and host private meetings away from what he called prying eyes and government spies. But as construction went on, the tone changed. Robinson recounted how Lance started using new terms: resistance base, purification chamber, and sanctuary. He told agents that Lance became obsessed with the idea that Charlie Kirk's audit, the same one that allegedly traced shadowy political donations, was a threat to their community. In his own words, Robinson said, Lance said people like Charlie wanted to erase us, that if we didn't act, they come for us next. FBI agents noted that his confession was not cold or calculated. It was fractured, emotional, almost remorseful. He repeatedly referred to Lance as the one who knew things, claiming Twiggs had connections to others who funded the SAFE network, possibly explaining how a 22-year-old student ended up living in a mansion far beyond his means. Then came the most chilling part. Robinson described the basement, the hatch, the cold steel hinges, the rooms below. He said he went down there only twice, once during construction and once more after it was completed. When asked what was inside, his response made agents pause. It wasn't insisted a tunnel to escape, it was to keep people in. He refused to elaborate further. Investigators pressed him about the coded writings on the walls, the cryptic phrases matching those found on the bullets used in the shooting. Robinson admitted to writing some of them himself, but under Lance's direction. He said the inscriptions were part of the conditioning, something Lance encouraged to train focus and purge fear. At one point, he broke down entirely, saying, "He told me if I didn't set do it, someone else would." He said it was already decided. The room reportedly went silent after that. Even seasoned agents, people who'd handled terrorism, trafficking, and organized crime, were shaken. Robinson says confession didn't just implicate his boyfriend, it reopened every unanswered question in the case. Who financed the mansion and the tunnel's construction? How deep did Lance Twiggs' connections run? And most importantly, was Tyler Robinson ever truly in control? After hours of questioning, Robinson signed a statement. He agreed to cooperate on one condition: immunity from the death penalty. The Department of Justice has not yet confirmed whether that request was granted. What's certain is that his confession marks a new chapter in a story already shrouded in secrecy and deception, because if Tyler Robinson didn't act alone, then somewhere out there, someone else knows exactly what that tunnel was for. Before he was a headline, before his name became synonymous with one of the most controversial crimes of the year, Tyler Robinson was just another face in the crowd, quiet, soft-spoken, and by most accounts, deeply loyal to those he loved. Friends describe him as gentle, empathic, and a bit lost. He was a college dropout working part-time at a pawn shop, drifting between online communities that promised belonging. That was where he met Lance Twiggs, charismatic, older by a few years, and deeply entrenched in fringe activist circles. To outsiders, Lance was everything Tyler wasn't: confident, outspoken, the kind of person who commanded attention. He presented himself as a protector, someone who could turn Tyler's confusion into purpose. Within months, their relationship became inseparable and, according to text records later obtained by investigators, dangerously controlling. Lance often spoke of missions, of purity through action, and of a hidden network that operated beneath society's radar. He told Tyler they were part of something bigger, something righteous. In messages dated weeks before the shooting, Lance wrote, "The system fears truth. Charlie Kirk is part of that system. If they silence him, they silence us all." It's unclear whether Tyler ever fully understood what Lance meant, or if he was simply echoing the rhetoric that surrounded him. Those close to him say he became paranoid, convinced he was being watched, that their phones were tapped, that agents were closing in. His sister, in an interview with the Daily Ledger, said, "He stopped coming to family dinners. He stopped laughing. It was like he was always waiting for something, like he knew something terrible was about to happen." Psychologists analyzing the confession footage say Robinson displayed clear signs of coercive psychological control, the kind often seen in cult-like dynamics. They point to the way he deferred blame, the trembling tone in his voice whenever he mentioned Lance, and his repeated need to justify everything that happened. The media, however, painted a different picture. Headlines called him a domestic extremist, radicalized youth, and a symbol of growing ideological violence. Overnight, his face became the face of everything broken in modern politics. But behind those labels was a man who, by his own admission, didn't understand the full weight of what he done. In the interrogation, he said something that has haunted many who watched the tape since. "I thought we were building something to protect people. I didn't know it would end in blood." It's a tragic contradiction, one that doesn't absolve him, but forces us to look deeper. Tyler Robinson wasn't just a suspect. He was also a product of manipulation, ideology, and fear. As the FBI continues to map out Lance Twiggs' alleged network, one question lingers: was Tyler a cold-blooded killer or a pawn in a much larger operation, one that's still unfolding beneath the surface? The shockwaves from Tyler Robinson's confession have rippled far beyond the courtroom, cutting deep into a community already bruised by tragedy. For Charlie Kirk's family, the confession has reopened wounds that had barely begun to heal. His wife, in a recent statement, said, "Hearing that there was a tunnel, that there were people involved we never even knew existed, it sits like losing him all over again. Every answer brings 10 new questions." At Charlie Sepp's old church, the candlelight vigils have returned. The walls, once covered with photos, messages of hope and flowers, now bear new signs, ones that read, "We deserve the truth." People gather nightly, holding candles, praying not just for justice, but for understanding. Local residents describe an atmosphere of distrust. Neighbors whisper about strange vehicles parked at odd hours, about movements near abandoned properties. Others have taken to online forums, posting theories, footage, and fragments of information they believe connect back to Lance Twiggs' hidden group. For law enforcement, the confession has reignited scrutiny. How did a fully constructed tunnel go unnoticed? How deep did the influence of this so-called group run? And how many others might still be involved? Within investigative circles, a quiet fear has emerged that the discovery of the tunnel was only the beginning. Inside, agents found makeshift sleeping quarters, wiring for cameras, and strange symbols carved into the concrete. Some call it ritualistic. Others say it's code. Forensic teams continue to process evidence pulled from that dark underground space, but the public reaction has been visceral. Protesters demand transparency. Commentators call it a failure of oversight. Online, conspiracy theories multiply by the hour. And yet, amid the noise, the human toll remains painfully clear. Families once divided by politics now unite in grief and confusion. The tragedy that began with a gunshot at noon has now evolved into something larger, a reckoning with truth, power, and trust. One resident put it best during an interview outside the courthouse. We used to argue about who was right. Now we just want to know what sits real. As the dust settles, one thing is certain: the story no longer belongs to just one man or one victim. It has become a mirror reflecting a nation's struggle to make sense of violence, ideology, and deception in an age where truth feels almost impossible to recognize. What began as a midday shooting, a single horrifying act, has now unfolded into something far deeper and far darker. Tyler Robinson's confession did more than expose a tunnel beneath a mansion. It peeled back layers of secrecy, ideology, and influence that many fear have quietly taken root in plain sight. The alleged involvement of Lance Twiggs and the so-called trans ANTIFA subgroup has ignited fierce national debate, not about identity, but about extremism, manipulation, and the invisible hands that exploit vulnerable people for violent ends. For investigators, the focus has shifted from a crime scene to a network. For the public, from outrage to unease. And for the families, from mourning to a desperate need for answers. Across social media and cable news, discussions have turned into battlegrounds. Some demand accountability from law enforcement for missing the signs. Others question whether political bias shaped the early narrative of the case. Still, others fear that misinformation on both sides may be obscuring an even more sinister truth. In Washington, quiet conversations have begun about domestic radicalization, about how online echo chambers can twist conviction into violence, and about how groups like the one Tyler described can operate for years beneath the radar, recruiting, indoctrinating, and hiding behind ideology to justify harm. But perhaps the most haunting question is this: if there was one tunnel beneath that mansion, how many others might there be? It's just a question investigators aren't dismissing, because evidence recovered from the basement, documents, maps, coded writings, hint that this was not an isolated operation. It might have been part of something coordinated, something planned. And yet, for all the speculation, one truth remains inescapable: a man is dead and a family is shattered. The pursuit of justice, real justice, demands patience and transparency. It demands that every lead be followed, no matter how uncomfortable, and every assumption be questioned, no matter how official. As this case continues to evolve, one can help but wonder, did Tyler Robinson confess out of guilt or fear? And if fear, who or what is he still protecting? Before we close, if you're following this investigation and believe that truth still matters, share and subscribe to stay updated as new details emerge. Because this story is far from over. And as always, remember, every detail matters in the pursuit of justice.